as a church in the valley. Would that be an invitation?
All right. Well, I guess we can go ahead and get started. It is 7 o'clock, so I guess we better go ahead and get started. We got a lot to get to tonight. Going to try to get through all 4 of these chapters, but I'm making no promises. Some of it depends whether or not there's comments or questions, which is okay. If we have to push it to another week, we can do that just fine. But it is good to see each one of you tonight. Thank you for being here this week and being together as we meet together in the middle of the week. Give you a quick reminder that next week we will be meeting on Tuesday instead of Wednesday. Let's go ahead and we'll get started with a word of prayer. Let's bow together. Heavenly Father, God in heaven, we thank you so much for bringing us together here in the middle of the week. We thank you for the opportunity we have to study your word and be together in fellowship. Thank you, Father, for the lessons that we've learned so far from the book of Genesis, and thank you for what we still have to learn as we go through this book. And pray that whenever we open your word and study from it, we'll be good students and learn from it and apply those lessons so that we can continue to bring glory to your name. We ask your blessings on those who cannot be with us due to their illnesses, or maybe those who might be traveling, or others that are unable to attend. We pray your blessings on them as they have a need. And as we, if we can, have opportunity, Father, help us to serve one another, especially those of our number who are dealing with various challenges. Go with us always, Father, and especially go with us tonight in this study. We ask you all these things in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. All right. We're in Genesis, starting in Genesis 42 tonight. Genesis 42, and going to try to get through chapter 45. As I said, that's the plan. We'll see how far we go. And if we have to continue next week, that's just fine. We started talking about Joseph a few weeks ago in chapter 37, dealing with Joseph's interactions with his brothers when his brothers sold him into slavery. Then we took a week off from Joseph to talk about Judah in Genesis chapter 38, and it looks like the PowerPoint is not wanting to play nice. It's working, but it's not. So if that goes out, I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do about it at this point. Technology is, I'm about tired of it. It's so temperamental. It looks like that's what it's going to do, is just blink throughout the whole time. So I apologize in advance for that. Talked about Joseph or Judah in chapter 38, and then picked up last week with Joseph again in chapter 39 through 41 and his rise in Egypt. This week we're really coming to what is a pivotal moment in Joseph's life At this point, he's been in Egypt for more than 20 years since his brothers sold him into bondage. And now, for the first time since that day, he's going to come face to face with his brothers. These are the same brothers who at one point hated him so much that they thought about killing him and ultimately settled on another plan that would put a little silver in their pockets. And these are the brothers who, in a way, we could say they were responsible for all the hardship that Joseph had endured in Egypt, being put in prison. I mean, if they hadn't sold him, he wouldn't have been in Egypt. None of that would have happened. So just try to think for a moment what that would be like. Wouldn't there be some temptations to repay in kind, especially if you're in Joseph's position? You have risen to a position of power. One of the, probably, you're second to one of the most powerful men in the world at this time. Certainly there would be some temptations on the part of many to repay what his brothers had done to him. And I do think, as we see especially in chapter 42 and some other parts of this section, that Joseph makes his brothers squirm a little bit. But ultimately, at the end of it all, his actions are, I think, exactly what we should expect from someone who fears God. Someone who wants to do what's pleasing to God. So that's what we want to look at as we go through these 4 chapters starting tonight. Maybe getting through all of them tonight. We'll see. But we'll start in chapter 42. And just before we dive into that, just a quick reminder. In fact, let's turn back to chapter 37 and be reminded of Jacob's dreams. The dreams that caused his brothers, or part of what caused his brothers to hate him so much in the first place. It says in Genesis 37 and verse 5, "Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, 'Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf.' His brothers said to him, 'Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to rule over us?' So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream, verse 9, and told it to his brothers and said, 'Behold, I dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me.' But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, 'What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?' And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind." Now we go back to chapter 42. And we see at least the first of those dreams coming true, at least in part. In verse 6, "Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground." Now, at this point, there's only 10 of them. Benjamin is not with them on this occasion. He will be later on, and maybe that might be an even more complete fulfillment of the dreams. But here we see it starting to come true, as at least part of his brothers, most of his brothers, are bowing down to him, recognizing that he is a man with authority. They are bowing down to the one who they once threw into a pit, treated like he was nothing, and now they're essentially recognizing him as superior. And look at how Joseph behaves towards them at first. It's interesting, to say the least. And we might expect that kind of harsh behavior from most people. That Is the way Joseph speaks to his brothers, the roughness with which he speaks to them. We might expect that from most people, but I would hope that we might expect a little bit better of Joseph at this point because of the time we've spent with him. We've seen the way he's behaved in other situations. So I'd hope we would have come maybe to expect better of him. Unfortunately, we're not really given a whole lot of insight into what Joseph was thinking. We're not really, we don't really peek behind the curtain, so to speak. We're not really given anything that's going on in his head. We're just told what he said and how he talked to his brothers. So at most, that's where we have to draw our conclusions from. And I think, this is my opinion, I really think this is the first of many tests that he's going to give to his brothers. Maybe he's trying to gain some information about their father. Is their father still alive? It's been, more than 2 decades, and Jacob was already an old man, seemingly when Joseph left. Maybe he wants to know about Benjamin, his younger brother, their families in Canaan. Maybe he wants to see what kind of men they are after 20 years. Have they changed at all? Or are they still just as hateful? Still just as, bent on their jealousy and hurting others as they were? I think he did get a little bit of information out of them. They didn't realize it because they didn't know he could understand them because they were using an interpreter, but he knew every word that they were saying. They were feeling some guilt for what they had done to Joseph. See that there in verse 21. They said to one another, "In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." Whether this is new or has been building for a while, they do feel some guilt for what they had done to Joseph. And then, I think this is an interesting little bit of a twist. In verse 22, Reuben answered them, "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood." So he learns, and I don't think we have any indication before this that he knew about this, but Reuben had tried to spare him all those years ago. Reuben had tried to protect him from his brothers all of those years ago. So I think that this is ultimately a test to find out what kind of men they are now, as opposed to what kind of men they were 20 or so years ago. But if you have any other thoughts or different opinions on that, I'd love to hear it. If you think Joseph was going another route, yeah, Gene?
Well, going back to the way he talked to them at the beginning, he was in charge of making sure that grain was sold to people legally as they needed it and that kind of thing, no matter what country they came from. And that may have been part of what he was doing was, granted, he knew who they were.
Yeah.
But he may have had to react that way with everybody when they came and not be different, from the interpreters.
Yeah.
If anybody's, or whoever came to him, he would have to do some kind of investigation as to why they were there and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that may have played a small part in that.
That's an interesting thought. The thing that gets me is, he straight out accused them, said, "You're spies." I feel like if he was doing that to everybody, that's not good. That's not good PR for Egypt. But I don't know. Maybe it keeps people from coming back, perhaps. But that's a good thought, though. I mean, I'm sure there is some of that, for sure. That he's just doing what he does with everybody. He's careful. He has to be careful with everybody. But I feel like he went a little further with his brothers.
I think it did.
Yeah, because he knew who they were, and I think there was some testing in that. Yeah, Marion.
I got stuck on the fact that he was there dealing with people who were coming. I think it did say somewhere else that that was his responsibility.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine someone in his position on the front line handing out food. You know, perhaps that's because of, you know,
Well, you might be thinking about that from a 21st century perspective too.
Yes.
Today,
Yes.
you definitely probably
that's
wouldn't
the
see
only
that.
one I know.
But that was his responsibility to make sure that, first of all, the grain was collected and stored, and also to handle the distribution of it. And there may have been, you know, I know it says back when he's appointed, there were regional officers put over, you know, in similar positions, not as high up as Joseph. So maybe it just so happens that they came to the place where Joseph was filling that role, and if they'd gone somewhere else, it would have been somebody else they had to deal with. But then I would see God's providence in that they came to Joseph and not someone else.
But I think it's a more major contract than that, because they're really getting food for like their whole tribe almost, all the people.
Yeah.
So they're not taking it for like one small family. It's like probably a pretty big transaction.
Yeah. And maybe there was something, if, you know, they had the regional officers for the Egyptians, and maybe if foreigners came in, you know, it went to a higher, you know, there's so many things we could speculate that we're not told. You know, we could go different routes with it, but ultimately it boils down to they came, they dealt with Joseph. I think he tested them.
I think he was pushing their buttons a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
See what he could get out of them. See what kind of information he could
And
get.
then we can always come back to the fact that God is in charge. They came together because God wanted them to.
Yeah.
But from an earthly or a human perspective, you wonder, how did it happen?
Yeah.
But if you don't find an answer, you can always go back to the fact that God is at work
Yeah.
in this.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is we don't know what the policies in Egypt were that caught, because that would have been the answer, you know, whatever all that was. But ultimately, it's God's providence working, which Joseph acknowledges more than once in a few different passages.
He'd been through enough too, I think. Maybe he was starting to feel a little remorse. Maybe he was a little cocky as a little boy, more so than he should have been. Some of the things he told them, I don't believe I would have said at that age to my older brothers or sisters.
Yeah, you know, and that's possible too. I'm trying to see the best in Joseph. For sure. I mean, because for one thing, he is so different from his forefathers. We've talked about that in previous weeks. You know, his forefathers constantly failed. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, there were several things that they did. We don't have anything like that from Joseph. You know, his is a constant story of success. You know, he didn't have those moments of where he kind of, his faith faltered a little bit. He kept on pressing on through it all.
Yeah, I'm just saying, you know, and he should have. He matured
Yeah,
a lot from when he was the younger brother.
yeah. And again, it's been over 2 decades at this point. So they've all had some time to mature.
Do you think the brothers thought that Joseph was dead? Because in verse 22 it talks about, you know, his blood is now required of us.
They may have.
And then, you know, because Reuben saved his life in 37, and then here, I just wonder, you know, got him to sell him into slavery instead, and then here it's, I wonder if he thinks he's dead. So it never even occurred to him that could be Joseph.
That may be a possibility too. You know, especially since they did sell him into slavery into Egypt. Who knows? You know, maybe they thought, well, by now he's got to be be gone. But there's probably some other factors of why they didn't recognize him. He clearly at this point looks like an Egyptian, and various things that we could talk about. But anyway, how about when they go back? They get their grain. They've told Joseph, not knowing that it's him, all about their father, all about their other brother. They've told him about what happened to him. They told him about what happened to their lost brother. And they head back home. They find their money back in their packs as they're heading back home. And then they get home and they tell Jacob everything that's happened. And he is not happy at all. He is distressed. He definitely is, they had to leave Simeon behind, had to leave him in custody as a kind of collateral, if you will. And the condition being next time they come, they bring Benjamin with them, and then they can buy grain and Simeon will be released. Well, think about Jacob's position. 20 years ago, give or take, these brothers went off. Joseph went a little bit later, but still went with his brothers. And they came back, no Joseph, and more money than what they had left with. Or more money than they should have had. Well, fast forward to the present time. They go to Egypt. They come back minus one brother. And with money that they should not have had. You just imagine what might be going through Jacob's mind. It's like, oh no, it's happened again. Granted, Simeon was one of the brothers that had kind of fallen out of his father's favor because of his sins in the past. But that didn't mean that Jacob didn't love his son anymore. It didn't mean Jacob didn't care about his son and what became of him. Can you blame Jacob after seeing that happen twice? Not wanting to send Benjamin, the only son, as far as he knew, the only son that remained from his wife Rachel, because she had died giving birth to Benjamin. Joseph, he assumed, was dead. They were her only two sons. So I don't blame Jacob for being so concerned about this prospect of sending Benjamin back to Egypt with his brothers. Of course, there'll be some time before that has to happen. They got a little bit of grain to last a little while, but it's not going to last forever.
Well, and he also knew that Benjamin was probably the favorite son as well. He really doesn't have proof that Benjamin's alive. He has the word of his brothers, but he doesn't trust his brothers. They sold him into slavery. So he really may want to see if his brother's really alive.
Oh, you think of Joseph?
Yeah,
wanting
may want to see if his brother's alive.
Yeah. I think he does. I'm talking about Jacob and his reaction, not wanting to send Benjamin back, for sure.
I would say, what was the purpose? If I was, I'm like, why does this person want to see my youngest son? What's the purpose? Is he going to take him away? That sort of thing.
Well, again, all of this too is they were being accused of being spies.
Right.
So that's the purpose, because that's what Joseph.
Yeah.
That's what Joseph told them. This is how I'm going to know you're telling me the truth. You're going to go back. You're going to bring your other brother back, and then I'll know that you're telling me the truth. So that would be the purpose in it. But again, there might still be something to wonder there, I'm sure. But one other thing to notice in this chapter is Reuben. We remember Reuben had fallen out of favor with his father back in, might have been chapter 37. No, it might have been a little earlier than that. I think it was chapter 35, when he slept with one of his father's concubines. And ever since that time, he's been trying to get back into Jacob's good graces. And I think he's trying to do it again here. He's still desperate to get back on his father's good side. And talk about an extreme offer, though, towards the end of chapter 42, verse 37. Reuben said to his father, "Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you." I mean, have we mentioned before that this family has a lot of problems? And, I don't know, he lived 4,000 years ago, so I can't talk to Reuben, but I don't think that's the best way to try to convince your father that you're responsible or trustworthy. Yeah, if I don't bring him back, you can just kill my sons. Okay. I mean, it's a serious thing because, the way it's worded, it sounds like they're his only 2 sons. He says, "Kill my 2 sons," right? I kind of take that to mean they're his only 2, when we've talked before about how important it was for a man's name to be carried on through his sons. So Reuben is putting a pretty hefty offer on the table here. He's basically putting himself into a position of kind of a curse being brought on him, so to speak, his name being erased. But I don't think Jacob was buying it. He definitely didn't respond well to Reuben's offer on this occasion. Benjamin's going to stay right where he is, as far as Jacob's concerned. But that grain's not going to last forever. And they don't know this, but I think at this point they're still about 5 years, or maybe the next time they talk when they finally find out who Joseph is, he says there's 5 years left of this famine. So maybe at this point there's 5.5, 6 years. I don't know how long the grain should have lasted that they went to get. But there's still a lot of this to go. That grain's not going to last forever. And Joseph told him, if you come back without your younger brother, not only are you not going to see your other brother, Simeon, again, you're not going to get to buy any grain either. He was pretty adamant about that. So something's going to have to give in the time to come, and that's going to be seen in chapter 43 as we move forward a little bit. Because the time passed, I don't know exactly how much time, and the grain ran out. Jacob tells his sons, go back, buy more, and they said, we can't do it. We can't do it because of what the man that they talked to, the man that they didn't realize was Joseph. He said, you're not buying more if you come back without your brother. So something's got to give. Somebody has to step up and take the lead, convince their father to let them take their youngest brother with them. And maybe we'd be a little bit surprised from what we read a couple of weeks ago in chapter 38. But it's Judah who steps up and takes the lead. He's really going to take the lead throughout the rest of their dealings with the Egyptians. Now keep in mind, it was Judah who, back in chapter 37, came up with the plan to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites. It was Judah who showed very poor judgment in the situation with Tamar in chapter 38. It was Judah who showed himself to be a bit of a hothead, no pun intended, when he found out that that Tamar was with child by another man by him. He didn't know it at the time. His first thought was burn her. Right? So he was pretty aggressive. And now, it looks like he's a different man. At least he seems to be. And we talked about that in chapter 38 when when we did that chapter, I mentioned that when we got to these chapters, we're going to see a different Judah. He's going to step up. He's going to take that leadership role. He's able to convince Jacob to let Benjamin go with them. And by the way, he does it without offering to sacrifice his own children. Later in chapter 44, he's going to show a willingness to sacrifice himself, so to speak. If it means that Benjamin gets to return home to his father. So he has definitely come to a point. He's ready to show some responsibility. And he definitely shows that here in these chapters. And so finally, with everything sorted out, Jacob agrees to send his sons back to Egypt. Benjamin with them. I think, first of all, because he knows there's no other way for them to survive. They don't have any crops. This famine is severe. I think sometimes we might not fully understand what famine is like. Because we can just go down to the grocery store, right? Pick up what we need. Even when there's a shortage, of something, we can probably find something else to eat. They didn't have that luxury. If there was a famine, it was going to get hard. And a lot of people would suffer greatly during that time. There's nowhere else to get grain, it seems. Only Egypt. So Jacob knew that if his family was going to survive, he would have to send them back. And I'm sure Judah, his willingness to take charge, his willingness to take that responsibility, I think that played a role as well. But notice that they didn't go empty-handed. If you've read in chapter 44 ahead of time, you know that not only do they take the money they need to buy grain this time, they take the money they took with them the time before, the money that was returned to them, they take that with them, and then a gift. Choice fruits of the land. And I think there's listed things like balm and honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, almonds, things like that. And I just wonder, are these things that they couldn't get in Egypt? Are they unique to Palestine, Canaan, that region? I don't know. But ultimately, it's a peace offering. Right? It is, again, last time these guys went to Egypt, they were accused of being spies. So they're coming back with not only the money to buy grain this time, they're coming back with the money they should have left behind in Egypt last time. They're coming with their brother, and they're coming with this gift. But Joseph apparently has some plans of his own. Because I don't know where they met with him before, assumedly in some place of business, like maybe at one of the granaries or something of that nature. But this time they're brought to his home. And I don't know, I can probably see why they would be so nervous. This man brought us to his home. What in the world is going on here? And so the first thing they start to do is they start trying to plead their case. Look, we left, we gave you the money, and when we got on the road and opened our packs to feed the animals, we realized there's our money. Like, we didn't try to steal it. It was just there. They're trying to plead their case. And that's when the steward who they were talking to, Joseph wasn't there yet. He sets them at ease. He shows them common hospitality, gives their animals some food, gives them water to wash their feet, brought Simeon out to them as had been agreed upon. And then, as I mentioned before, we're going to see those dreams of Joseph's, we're going to see them play out again and again as we go through these chapters. In verse 26, when Joseph came home, They brought into the house to him the present that they had with them and bowed down to him to the ground. So maybe I should have saved, shouldn't have talked about the dreams before, talked about them now, because now that first dream that he had where the stalks of wheat were bowing down to his, 11 of them, well, here are his 11 brothers bowing down to him as one who is in authority. And he treats them differently this time. Much more cordial, which they, for the sake of the charade, if you will, they proved that they weren't spies, didn't they? They did exactly what he had asked them to do. So he's much more gentle with them. He gets emotional when he sees Benjamin. I don't know how old Benjamin was when they parted. Joseph was only 17. So Benjamin couldn't have been, he had to have been younger than that, probably much younger. Maybe not even a teenager yet. I'm not exactly sure how many years intervened between Joseph and Benjamin's birth. At least 6, because after Joseph was born, he still remained in Haran for 6 years, but maybe a little bit more than that. He gets emotional, which, by the way, is not the first time he had to step away and compose himself. He did that the first meeting. He got emotional, had to step away for a minute. He does that here. He gets emotional, has to step away for a minute. It's not going to be the last time either. It's going to happen again a little bit later on. And after he composed himself, they serve a meal. They have a meal together, although not really together. That's one of the interesting details that Moses throws in there for us that probably really makes no sense to us today, but it makes sense to its original readers. They probably understood exactly why it was considered an abomination for the Egyptians to eat at the same table with the Hebrews. We don't really know. Some of the study that I did suggests that it was a dietary thing. The Hebrew people, one of the staples of their diet, at least when they did eat meat, was lamb. And the Egyptians didn't do that. In fact, one source I read said that they considered lamb to be sacred. And so to eat at the same table, even if lamb wasn't being served, it was still considered an abomination to even eat at the same table. I think the Jews would adopt that at some point when it came to the Gentiles. They wouldn't want to eat at the same table with somebody who ate pork or any of the other forbidden foods that God had told them not to eat. So that might be why it was considered an abomination for the Egyptians to dine with Hebrews. And other sources said it wasn't just the Hebrews. There were other groups that they had similar qualms about. But what stands out, I guess, the most here is, first of all, how the brothers are seated. Right? They're in order from oldest to youngest. You think that happened by accident? I don't think so. And then he gives Benjamin like 5 times as much as anybody else. So the thought that I had, obviously Joseph is trying to keep up the disguise, right? By not eating at the same table with them, and not just for their sake, but for his servants, officials that were working with him. But do you get the feeling maybe he's trying to drop some hints? I mean, that's the feeling that I got. He seats them in the proper order. He gives extra to Benjamin. I mean, I could be completely off base, but that's just the feeling that I get from it, that he's trying to keep up the disguise, but also trying to subtly hint that, this is who I am. Yeah, Jean?
I think it's curious that they have the brothers eating together, Joseph eating by himself, and the Egyptians eating by themselves. Why would the brothers wonder why Joseph has to eat by himself instead of eating with the Egyptians?
Maybe just his rank, his position. I don't know.
No, it's just curious to me that everybody's seated in all kinds of different places,
Yeah.
but at the same time, he follows the normal
What would be expected. Yeah. Mary?
I thought it strange as well that the Egyptians would not eat with a Hebrew, but they put a Hebrew in the second highest position in their country.
Yeah, I'm curious how many knew that he was Hebrew, though. Pharaoh obviously knew, because he was told, there's a Hebrew who can, but I don't know. And I don't know, maybe that's why the other Egyptians weren't eating with Joseph. Maybe they did know, but I doubt it. I doubt many people knew he was Hebrew. Because he would have, in almost every way assimilated into that culture. Dress, different things like that. One of the things that in part of my reading that was mentioned was, he would have shaved off his beard, which he did before he went into Pharaoh on the first occasion. Egyptians typically at that time didn't wear facial hair. The Hebrews did. To this day, there are some Jewish groups that will not cut their facial hair. That was part of the culture at that time, still part of that culture today. So, he was very clearly, at least in everybody's eyes, for almost all intents and purposes, Egyptian.
It was a cosmopolitan place anyway, through Alexandria.
Yeah.
I had people from all over the world were in Egypt, so
Yeah.
it was very diverse.
It was. And at this time, one of the most powerful countries or nations in the world. In part, maybe because of Joseph. But even before that, they were exceedingly powerful. So. That brings us to the end of chapter 43. We've got about 3 minutes left. We can go ahead and... There's really not a whole lot to say in chapter 44 because so much of the chapter is kind of repeating things we've already read back in chapter 42. I told you then that it was my opinion that Joseph was testing his brothers. I'm definitely more convinced of that on this occasion, that he is trying to see what kind of men they are. Especially the 10 older brothers, because, they would know if any of them was caught with stolen property. I would think they would know that he would have to suffer the consequences. That would be expected of whoever that was. And so I think, he's trying to figure out, will they fight for their youngest brother? Or will they just leave him to his fate? He's trying to figure out what kind of men they are today. Even more so, I think, than what he was doing before. That's why he, told this steward, hide this silver cup in Benjamin's package. And then when they get a little ways out of town, now he says, go chase after him. It was all a charade, right? It was all a setup. And ultimately think he's, again, testing his brothers. See how they're going to react. Are they going to go to bat for their brother? Or are they just going to leave him to whatever may come? And turns out they would fight for him. Or at least one of them. I think all of them. But one of them especially, Judah, again, takes the lead. Starting in verse 16. And again, most of what he says through this chapter is what we already know. We came, we told you about our family, you told us, don't come back without your brother. We told our father, he said no. We convinced him, and here we are. And we can't leave without our brother. I'm especially drawn to how Judah ends his speech. says in verse 30, "Now therefore, as soon as I come to your servant my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with your brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father." Again, I have to ask, is this the same man who was dishonest with his daughter-in-law? Wanted to burn her alive, and when it became apparent she had been immoral? Is this the same man who sold his brother into bondage, not seeming to care how much it would upset his father at that time? I don't think he's the same man. Something has changed. I think it started back there in chapter 38. So as much as this is Joseph's story, it's kind of Judah's story too. And I think that's significant, because who are we going to, who's going to bear the throne? Where is the Messiah going to come from? He's the tribe of Judah. So that's important too. So even though we're reading Joseph's story, I do think we're reading Judah's at the same time. Just he's kind of a supporting character, all right? But we're seeing his development through all of this as well. And unfortunately, we're going to have to stop there for this week and get into chapter 45 next week. But that is what ultimately convinces Joseph that now is the time to reveal the truth to his brothers. So that's where we'll stop for tonight, and pick up there next week on Tuesday instead of Wednesday of next week. Next week is Thanksgiving, so we'll be meeting a day early. And if you want to, go ahead and read 46 and 47 of Genesis, along with reading chapter 45 again to prepare for next week, because I don't think it'll take us that long to get through chapter 45. And then we'll pick up with those other two chapters as well. Anything else before we close?
What you might do Tuesday morning, you might send us a little reminder, because we get in 51 weeks in a row without doing that.
Tell you what, send me a reminder to send you a reminder.
We never know what day it is.
I had to ask Karen today, Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah, well, I've been a day ahead all week, because I've kind of changed my schedule up this week. So I spent half of yesterday thinking it was Wednesday. I spent half of the day thinking it was Thursday. So I will try to remember that, though.